Hello, my name is Andrew, and today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Bulgarian language from a linguistical standpoint. I'm going to be using some linguistical terminology. I'll do my best to explain as I go along. And I'm probably going to make some videos explaining how to speak some basic Bulgarian, but this is not one of those. So, to start off with, Bulgarian is a South Slavic language. So, Slavic languages include things like Bulgarian, Polish, Croatian, Serbian, Belarusian, Ukrainian, Russian, all these languages. And Slavic languages are divided generally into three groups. Eastern Slavic languages, the one that's best known would be Russian. Western Slavic languages, that includes things like Polish and Czech. And then South Slavic languages, that would be things like Bulgarian, Serbian, Macedonian. And those South Slavic languages form what's called a dialect continuum, where a person on one side of the area that these languages is spoken in probably can't understand somebody from the other side, but between those two, if you move in increments, people can understand each other. For instance, one of the places I lived in Bulgaria is called Blagoevgrad, and there they speak something that's kind of halfway between Bulgarian and Macedonian. It's interesting because even some of the people I spoke to referred to that dialect as Macedonian, others referred to it as Bulgarian, some people referred to it with some kind of quantifier. Bulgaria and the other South Slavic countries also find themselves in something called a Sprachbund, which is basically a language area. What that is a geographical area where languages that may or may not actually be related to each other share grammatical features. So Bulgaria borders Greece, for instance, and even though those two countries speak languages that are not closely related at all, they share linguistic features together. Bulgaria also spent 500 years under Turkish control in what the Bulgarians called Tursko ropstvo, and because of that they inherited a lot of Turkish words, many of which were inherited in turn from Arabic originally, which means Bulgarian's vocabulary has strayed a little ways away from what your standard Slavic language might have. That being said, it still does share the majority of its words with languages like Russian. Grammar-wise, however, it is very different from languages like Russian, those Eastern Slavic languages, also very different from Western Slavic languages. Bulgarian and Macedonian are the only two Slavic languages that don't have a productive case system. What that means is, in most Slavic languages, you will change a word to match what it's doing in a sentence. For instance, the word for woman in Russian is zhenshina. If I were to say that I was doing something to the woman, for instance, I love the woman, that would be ya lublu zhenshinu. The end of that word changes. However, in Bulgarian, the word for woman being žena, it wouldn't change no matter what it's doing in the sentence. If I say I love the woman, that's obicham ženata. I guess that does seem to kind of change, which brings us to our next thing. The word žena itself stayed the same, but what happened is we added a definite article. That's another thing that's fairly unique in Bulgarian, and also a feature of Macedonian, is that they have definite articles. And the vast majority of Slavic languages just don't have those, which differentiates them massively. Something they do with those definite articles is also a huge difference. In Russian, to say something belongs to the woman, for instance, the woman's book, you would say kniga, meaning book, and then zhenshina, meaning of the woman. In Bulgarian, what you do instead of that is you take the word that's being possessed, you add a definite article to it, then you say na, meaning to, and then the person or thing possessing it. So that would be kniga ta, kniga being the word for book, ta being the definite article, na zhenata, the book to the woman, which is very different from the majority of languages, including other Slavic languages. Other than that, Bulgarian has some features between its different dialects that distinguish those from the standard Bulgarian that you'll find written in literature. One of the most notable features that varies based upon what dialect you're speaking is what they do with something called a yacht. In Old Bulgarian, they had this letter called Yacht, which I will make appear right here. And depending on what accent you spoke, they would either pronounce that as the sound ya or the sound e, occasionally the sound ye. Now, Standard Bulgarian has gotten rid of yacht, which means they had to make a judgment call on which words that had a yacht now have a ya and which words have an e. They just decided none were getting a ya. But just because that's written a certain way doesn't mean that's the way everybody says it. So for instance, the word for true, vjarno. In Varna, a city on the eastern side of Bulgaria, they'll say vjarno. In Blagoevgrad, they would say verno. The closer you get to the middle of the country, as a general rule, the harder it is to predict what's going to go where. The further you go east, you're going to get a lot more yas. The further you go west, you're going to get a lot more es. And just general words that people use can be quite different. For instance, when I moved to Blagoevgrad, before doing that, I was pretty solidly convinced that I was just hot stuff when it came to speaking Bulgarian. I moved there, I talked to somebody, and I just had no idea what they were saying most of the time. And that was because they spoke a dialect that I wasn't used to. So, to contrast, in Standard Bulgarian, you might say "Shte chodya tam." In Blagoevgrad, that same sentence, if they were speaking in their dialect, might be "Ke odam tamoka." And certain words are just completely different. Those words, you can see the connection there, but that's not always the case. For instance, the word for cat is generally kotka. In Western Bulgaria, that often becomes machka, which you're just not going to recognize as a language learner until somebody tells you. That being said, the vast majority of people are educated and so are capable of speaking in a standardized Bulgarian dialect. Where that dialect comes from is another interesting story. Basically, there's 3 ways to go about creating an official language. You can try to create an average of all the dialects spoken. You can try to represent the dialect of a specific region, or you can just make up a dialect. And Bulgarian kind of went with number 2 and number 3. They represented a certain region of Bulgaria, but that region was fairly large and fairly diverse in and of itself. And what you ended up doing is they just had to make up certain rules, like that yacht thing earlier. They had to decide what got a ya, what got an eh. They had to make similar calls with a lot of grammatical principles, which means that Standard Bulgarian is not a type of Bulgarian that is native to any place. The majority of Bulgaria does speak in standardized Bulgarian now, but they will also often engage in code switching, which is where in a formal context you speak very formally, and in an informal context you speak in a way that's so different that it might even be unintelligible. And there's obviously a lot more that I could go into on the linguistic side of Bulgarian. I've kind of jumped around a lot, so I'm just going to leave those things with you. I'll be making a new video in a few days where I'm going to explain some of the basics of Bulgarian. So if you'd like to check that out, stick around.